It was late in the afternoon when I first heard it. At first, I thought it was a child crying somewhere in the woods. The sound was sharp, uneven, full of desperation. I froze on my porch, listening, trying to understand if I was imagining it. But then it came again, louder, closer, echoing through the trees like a voice that didn't belong in the silence of the forest. My stomach turned cold. Something was wrong out there. I stepped down from the porch and moved slowly across the yard, my ears straining to catch the direction of the sound. It wasn't the cry of a bird, nor the bark of a dog. It carried something raw and aching, something almost human. I followed it until I reached the tree line, and then I stopped. My eyes caught movement just ahead, a shadow sliding between the trunks. And then I saw her. A lynx stood there, not 20 feet away, her golden eyes fixed on me with a piercing intensity. My first reaction was fear. I knew how dangerous a wild animal could be, especially one protecting her young. I thought about retreating, going back inside, pretending I had never heard anything. But then I noticed what was lying at her side. A cub, small and frail, its body pressed against the ground as if it had no strength left. The cry I had heard, it had come from that tiny creature. Its chest moved unevenly, shallow breaths pushing through with effort. My heart clenched. I wanted to move closer, but I didn't dare. The mother's gaze never left me. It was hard, unwavering, but behind it, I sensed something I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't a threat. It was almost a plea. I crouched slowly, keeping my eyes on her, my palms open in front of me. The cub let out another weak sound, and the lynx lowered her head, nudging it gently with her nose. She looked back at me again, her ears twitching, her body tense but not advancing. I could almost hear my pulse in my ears. Every instinct told me to keep my distance, but every part of me screamed that the little one wouldn't last much longer. I whispered, barely above a breath. I don't even remember what I said, something like, "It's okay. I see you. I'm not here to hurt." My voice shook, but I kept it steady as best I could. The lynx blinked slowly, then shifted her weight, almost as if she were showing me the cub. That tiny movement made my throat tighten. It felt like she was asking me to see, to understand. For a moment, I thought about running back to the house, grabbing something, water, a blanket, anything. But I was afraid she'd take the cub and vanish before I returned. I stayed, rooted in place, the air thick between us. She lowered herself beside the cub, her paw resting protectively over its back, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. They weren't the eyes of a beast ready to strike. They were the eyes of a mother who had no other choice. Minutes dragged like hours. I shifted slightly closer, my knees brushing against the grass. She didn't move, but her ears twitched sharply at the sound. The cub stirred weakly, lifting its head for just a second before collapsing again. I swallowed hard. I knew that if I turned away now, I would never forgive myself. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath. Not a bird sang, not a leaf rustled. Just me, the lynx, and her fragile cub clinging to life. The distance between us was more than physical. It was a line drawn between two worlds that weren't meant to cross. Yet here we were, staring at each other across it. And then it happened. She shifted her paw away from the cub, leaving it exposed on the ground between us. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. She leaned back slightly, her muscles still coiled with tension, but her head dipped low, her gaze steady on me. In that moment, I understood. She wasn't warning me away. She was showing me her cub. I felt my body lean forward almost against my will, my hands pressing into the earth as I inched closer. The cub let out a faint whimper, and I stopped, afraid the mother would lunge. But she didn't. She only watched, unblinking, her tail flicking once against the ground. The world had shrunk to this one impossible moment, man and wild animal bound by something deeper than fear. I stopped just a few feet away, close enough to see the cub's shallow breaths, close enough to smell the musk of the lynx in the cool air. My hands trembled. I didn't reach out, not yet. I only looked at her, then at the cub, then back at her. Her ears flicked once more, and I swear she gave the slightest nod, as if saying, "It's your turn now." My breath caught in my throat. I had no idea what to do, no plan, no certainty. But one thing was clear, the lynx had made a choice. And now, so did I. I don't know how long I crouched there, caught between fear and urgency, but at some point, I realized I had no choice. The cub lay so still I could barely tell if it was breathing. If I did nothing, it would die right there in front of me. My hands shook as I leaned in closer. The mother lynx stayed motionless, her body taut, but her eyes never left mine. It felt like she was giving me permission, or maybe warning me not to fail. I slid my arms under the cub. It was lighter than I expected, just skin and bones beneath the soft fur. Its tiny chest rose and fell so faintly that I thought I might be too late. My throat tightened as I lifted it against me. For a second, I froze, waiting for the mother to lash out. She didn't. She only shifted her weight, her muscles tense but her paws planted, as if she was tethered to the ground by her own decision. Step by step, I moved backward toward the porch, the cub limp in my arms. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to keep my eyes on the lynx. She followed me with her gaze, but didn't move, her tail flicking once in the dirt. The moment I stepped onto the wooden boards, the cub let out a tiny, rasping cry. The sound pierced me deeper than I thought possible. I hurried inside. In the kitchen, I laid the cub gently on a folded blanket near the stove. My house wasn't much, but the old iron stove still radiated a soft warmth. I touched its fur. It was cold, far too cold for something so small. I grabbed another blanket, wrapping it loosely, and set a pot of water to warm. My mind was a mess, flipping between what I remembered about wildlife care and the sheer panic that I was completely unprepared for this. I dipped a cloth in warm water and wiped around its mouth, hoping to coax some response. Nothing. Its eyes stayed half closed, the rise and fall of its chest shallow and unsteady. I spoke aloud without thinking, my voice low and trembling. You can't give up. Not here, not now. You've come too far. I don't know if I was talking to the cub or to myself. When the water cooled enough, I filled a small bowl and tried to tilt it toward its lips. A tiny flick of the tongue touched the water, but it barely swallowed. Desperation clawed at me. I rummaged through the pantry, looking for anything, milk, broth, something light enough to keep it alive. I settled on diluted goat's milk I had left from a neighbor's visit. I remembered once being told that it was better than cow's milk for weak animals. I poured a little into a bottle I used for feeding orphaned kittens years ago. My hands trembled as I pressed the nipple gently to the cub's mouth. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, it sucked once, twice, before drifting back into stillness. Relief hit me so hard my knees buckled. It wasn't much, but it was something. I kept stroking its head gently, whispering, "Stay with me. Just stay with me." Outside, I heard a rustle. I went to the window, and there she was, the mother lynx, sitting in the yard, her silhouette framed against the darkening forest. She hadn't left. She was waiting. Night came fast. The stove crackled softly, filling the room with heat, but I couldn't shake the chill crawling through me. The cub's breathing stayed weak, shallow, uneven. Every few minutes, I touched its nose, checked its chest, terrified the rhythm might stop. I sat on the floor beside it, elbows on my knees, my face buried in my hands. The question spun round and round in my head. Did I do the right thing? Was I helping, or was I only making things worse by interfering? Nature had its rules. Maybe I wasn't meant to break them. But then the cub stirred faintly, its paw twitching against the blanket. I leaned closer, whispering again, "It's okay. You're safe. I'm here." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. The room felt unbearably small, like the whole world had narrowed down to this fragile life in front of me. Hours dragged by. I tried the bottle again, and this time it managed a few more weak swallows. My hope flickered, fragile but real. Still, I knew the night would be the test. If it survived until morning, maybe it had a chance. If not, I shook the thought away, forcing myself to stay focused. Outside, a low cry echoed, the same cry I had heard before, but softer now, almost mournful. The mother lynx was still there, calling out in the night. I stepped onto the porch for a moment, the cool air biting my face. She sat near the edge of the trees, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Our gazes met once more. She didn't move closer, didn't retreat. She only sat, waiting. I whispered across the distance, "I'm trying. I promise." Then I went back inside, closing the door softly behind me. I sat down beside the cub again, my hand resting lightly on its side, feeling the fragile rhythm of its breath. The hours stretched long, the fire burned low, and the weight of uncertainty pressed down on me like a stone. By midnight, its breathing grew more uneven. Every pause between breaths felt like an eternity. I stayed awake, afraid to even blink, knowing this night might decide everything. The night stretched endlessly, the kind where minutes felt like hours. I barely moved from the floor beside the cub, my hand hovering near its tiny chest. Each time it drew in a shaky breath, I let out one of my own, as if we were tethered together. Somewhere outside, I could still hear the faint rustle of the mother lynx shifting in the dark, her presence like a shadow that refused to leave. I forced myself up once, needing air. The porch creaked softly as I stepped outside, and there she was. The lynx lay curled at the edge of the clearing, her eyes glowing in the faint moonlight. She didn't rise, didn't move, only lifted her head when I appeared. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the cold night air. I whispered to her, my voice breaking, "He's still here. He's fighting." She blinked slowly, then laid her head back on her paws. It felt like an answer. Inside, the cub's breathing slowly found a rhythm, still shallow, but steadier than before. I fed it again, only drops at a time, terrified of overwhelming its fragile body. Each time it swallowed, relief spread through me like fire thawing ice. I couldn't help but smile through the exhaustion. Maybe it had a chance. Morning crept in with gray light pushing through the windows. I must have dozed off because the knock at my door jolted me awake. My heart jumped into my throat. Who would be here now? I glanced at the cub, then the window, then reluctantly opened the door. It was my neighbor, Dan, bundled in a thick jacket, his expression sharp. He didn't waste time. "Heard you had some noise here last night," he said. "Something about crying in the woods?" I tried to deflect, but his eyes narrowed, catching sight of the blanket on the floor behind me. His voice dropped. Is that a lynx cub?" Panic surged through me. I stepped into the doorway, blocking his view. Dan's face tightened. "Are you insane? That mother's out there somewhere. You're asking to get mauled." He lowered his voice further, shaking his head. "You should call wildlife control before this gets out of hand." I clenched my fists at my sides. I couldn't explain what had happened, not fully, not in a way he'd understand. All I managed was a quiet, "I can't. Not yet." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind, muttering about danger, lawsuits, and wild animals that didn't belong in a man's house. But I didn't move. Finally, he cursed under his breath and walked off, leaving me with the weight of his words. I shut the door and leaned against it, the house suddenly too quiet. The cub stirred faintly, its paw twitching against the blanket. I sank down beside it again, stroking its fur. "You're not just an animal to her," I whispered. "You're her whole world. And for now, you're mine too." The day passed in fragments, feeding, resting, checking its breath, then stepping out to see the mother still waiting. She never left the clearing, never wandered into the woods. Sometimes she paced, sometimes she lay still, but always her golden eyes fixed toward the house. That gaze held me, anchored me. It wasn't just survival now. It was trust. Fragile, unspoken, but undeniable. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I sat on the porch with the cub nestled in my arms, bundled tight in the blanket. The lynx emerged from the shadows, closer this time, her muscles taut, her movements careful. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't move. I held the cub where she could see, whispering softly, "He's still here. He's stronger today." Her ears twitched, her tail flicked once, and for a heartbeat, it felt like we shared something wordless but real. The bond between us wasn't natural. It wasn't supposed to exist. And yet, there it was, etched into every glance, every heartbeat. That night, as the fire dimmed inside, I realized she hadn't moved far at all. She wasn't hunting, wasn't wandering. She had planted herself near my home, as if her world, too, had shrunk down to this fragile line between life and loss. She wasn't leaving. Not anymore. The morning sun spilled across the porch, filling the room with a pale warmth that felt different from the day before. I sat on the floor, rubbing the stiffness out of my legs, when I noticed the cub stir against the blanket. Its head lifted weakly, eyes blinking open just a little wider than before. I held my breath. Slowly, shakily, it pushed with its front paws, struggling to rise. My heart leapt into my throat. For the first time since I had seen it lying limp on the forest floor, the cub was trying to stand. I leaned closer, afraid to scare it, but desperate to see it succeed. Its legs trembled beneath the weight of its tiny body, paws splayed awkwardly against the wooden boards. For a second, I thought it would collapse again, but then it steadied, just for a heartbeat, and took a small, stumbling step. My chest burned with relief, a laugh breaking out of me before I even realized. "You did it," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You really did it." It only managed 2 shaky steps before sinking back down, but that was enough. I felt the weight on my shoulders lift, just a little. Hope wasn't just a fragile thought anymore. It was standing on its paws right in front of me. I opened the door to let some air in, and there she was, the mother lynx, still watching from the clearing. I stepped onto the porch, holding the cub in my arms. She rose to her feet immediately, her body stiff with tension. I lowered myself, showing her the little one as I whispered, "He stood today. He's getting stronger." Her ears twitched, her gaze locked on her cub. The bond between them stretched across the distance, pulling at me in ways I hadn't expected. As the day unfolded, the cub grew a little bolder. It licked at the bottle more eagerly, nuzzled into the blanket, even batted weakly at my hand with one paw. Each small action felt like a victory, a step away from the edge it had been clinging to. My exhaustion faded in the light of those moments, replaced by a quiet joy I hadn't felt in years. But reality was never far. Late that afternoon, I heard movement just beyond the yard. I stepped outside to see the mother lynx crouched low near the tree line. Her muscles rippled as she crept forward, and then, in a flash, she leapt, disappearing into the underbrush. A moment later, the sharp cry of a hare split the silence, followed by nothing. When she emerged again, her jaws carried the limp body of her prey. She dropped it just inside the clearing and sat beside it, her eyes turning toward me. The sight shook me. It was a reminder of what she was, what her world demanded of her. She was no house pet, no creature meant to linger by a stove. She was a hunter, a mother forged by the wild. And the cub in my arms was meant for that same world, not mine. I carried the cub to the porch, letting it sniff the air. Its nose twitched faintly, and for a moment I thought about what the future held. Could it survive if I kept it here? Could I even imagine a life where it grew up inside 4 walls, away from everything it was meant to be? The thought felt wrong, like trying to cage the wind. That evening, I sat on the steps, the cub nestled against my chest, the mother a dark silhouette at the edge of the trees. I felt the weight of the decision pressing closer with every passing hour. My voice was quiet as I spoke into the cooling air. "I can't keep you. I know that. You belong to her, to the forest, to something bigger than me. But letting go, I don't know how I'm supposed to do that." The cub let out a soft sound, almost a purr, and I held it tighter, my throat tightening. Behind me, the stove crackled softly. In front of me, the lynx stood watch, her golden eyes glowing with a patience that felt endless. The line between our worlds was still there, but it was growing thinner by the day. When the stars began to appear, I realized the choice was coming whether I was ready or not. The cub couldn't stay with me forever. The wild was calling, and I would have to answer. My chest ached with the weight of it, but deep down, I knew soon I would have to let go. The morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of day where every sound carries farther than usual. I sat on the porch, the cub curled against my chest, its small body warmer, stronger. For the first time, it wasn't trembling when it shifted in my arms. Instead, it lifted its head and looked toward the trees where its mother waited. The sight twisted something deep inside me. I knew what it meant. The time had come. I carried the cub outside, my steps slow and heavy. The mother lynx was there, just as she had been every day, her golden eyes fixed on me. She rose to her feet when I appeared, her muscles taut but her body still. The air between us felt charged, thick with a meaning I couldn't put into words. I lowered myself to the ground and placed the cub gently on the grass. For a moment, it hesitated. It turned toward me, then back to the clearing, as if torn between 2 worlds. My throat tightened. I wanted to reach out, to hold it again, to tell it to stay. But this wasn't my place. This wasn't my choice to make. The mother stepped forward, each movement deliberate, silent, powerful. She stopped just a few feet away, her gaze locked on me. My heart pounded, but I didn't move. I only sat there, the weight of the moment pressing down. Slowly, she leaned her head down toward the cub, nudging it with her nose. The cub let out a faint, playful sound and pushed weakly against her chest. Then she did something that froze me in place. She lifted her head and looked straight at me. Not a glance, not a fleeting acknowledgement. She held my gaze, her eyes steady and unflinching. It felt like a conversation without words, a moment stretched beyond anything I'd ever experienced. In that look, there was no anger, no threat, only recognition, only trust. I swallowed hard, my voice breaking as I whispered, "He's yours." He always was. "Thank you for letting me help." The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. She blinked once, slow and deliberate, before turning back to her cub. The little one stumbled forward, its legs stronger now, pressing close against her fur. She nudged it again, guiding it toward the trees. My chest ached as I watched them move together, her body shielding him, her steps sure and certain. The cub glanced back once, just for a second, before disappearing into the shadows of the forest with her. I stayed frozen where I was, staring at the empty clearing long after they were gone. The silence felt heavier than ever, but not empty. It was full of everything that had happened, of everything that had changed inside me. My hands shook as I pressed them to my face, not sure if I was holding back tears or letting them fall. Eventually, I stood and stepped back onto the porch. The house felt different now, quieter, but also lighter. I sank into the chair by the door, staring at the tree line where I had last seen them. My voice was barely more than a whisper. She trusted me, and I let go. The days ahead would be the same in some ways. The forest would still stretch beyond my yard. The stove would still warm the house at night. Life would go on. But I knew I would never hear a cry in the woods the same way again. I would never forget the weight of that tiny body in my arms, the gaze of a wild mother who chose to believe in me. I leaned back, closing my eyes against the morning sun. My chest hurt, but not from regret. It was something deeper, something I couldn't name. Pain and peace, sorrow and gratitude, all tangled into one. It wasn't just about saving a life. It was about being trusted with one. And that trust would stay with me for the rest of my days. Somewhere in the distance, faint and almost lost in the wind, I thought I heard it. A low call, soft and steady. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe not. But I smiled through the ache in my throat. Wherever they were together now. That was all that mattered. And as I sat there, I knew one truth with absolute clarity. She had trusted me with her world, and when the moment came, I did the only thing I could. I let go.